may experience, which has to do with priorities. I'm wondering if he's going to tell us how we can set our priorities here. His title is So Many Good Deeds, So Little Time.
Thank you, Dan. I'm not going to tell you. I don't do a good job myself, so little time, so many good deeds to do. If you're like me, you struggle with this on a regular basis. I certainly do. Figuring out where you put your time, your talent, and your treasure to help make the world a little better. Independent of that personal struggle, I have the struggle of being an ethical cultural leader that has to try to encourage certain ethical action projects, and I got to figure out how to do that. I usually do that by trying to think about our history, our values, and our mission in ethical humanism. And today I want to share some of these musings. It's not telling you how you as an individual should make your decisions on what sort of ethical projects or actions or service that you offer. That's for you to decide. And that's very important for me to say. For those of you who want your choices to reflect ethical humanism, mission, values, and history, then this is a conversation that I'm opening up to you today. So you see where I'm coming from. Because it's the hardest thing to set your own priorities. As I said, I struggle with it all the time. But I care deeply about it. I turn to the words of S. Burns Weston, who was the leader of the Humanist Society here at Rittenhouse Square from 1903 to 25. Actually, he was involved in the move here from our old site. He was the leader here, and like me, Weston was not naturally religious. Like me, he grew up in a pretty secular environment. And like me, he never had a conversion experience into ethical culture. But he was more interested in ethics than in metaphysics, which is also where I think I fit. He said, I believe in the supremacy of ethics and religion. I believe that there's nothing more sacred and more truly religious than wholehearted devotion to that which one holds to be of supremest worth, one's ethical ideals. These are not ideals that exist in some magical form like Plato's realms, or it's not ideals that are written on some stone handed to us by a supernatural God telling us what to do. These are values that we try to live out in deeds. It's about what we do. So here are the ideals that I'm going to put on the table that I hope our collective action as an ethical humanist society reflects. Okay, so my talk's going to go into all of these. I hope that ethical humanist projects honor the inherent worth of every individual by maximizing their potential. I hope they do the work of the world by developing ethical and personal and organizational relationships that are grounded in mutuality and respect. And I hope they reflect the long-term goal of social transformation to a significantly more ethical society. So, work, relationships, and justice. These are the ends that I seek as an ethical culture leader trying to promote action. Believing as I do in the tight relationship between ends and means, the process of doing these things, I hope, in honoring these things in action, offer the following things. I hope the good deeds we try to do as a collective, we agree to be pragmatic and work together where we agree, and allowing individuals to be different and unique and have their own initiative. I hope we don't violate reason and ignore evidence. That's a part of our background. And I hope we choose sustainable projects. Things that help us keep doing that. So, pragmatic cooperation, reason, and sustainability are the how we do our ethical action. I hope. That's how I approach it. So now I'm going to go into all of those 6 pieces for the rest of my talk. So, to start, I think ethical action should honor the inherent worth of every person by trying to bring out their potential. We try to acknowledge the inherent worth of every person, saying that they are unique and they are irreplaceable. that there's only one you, right? Now, if we take seriously that we say all people have worth, that's an extreme position. Everyone has worth. Even if I judge them as misguided and dangerous, even if I act to restrain them because I fear they're going to harm people, even if I want them to be incarcerated, they still have worth. It's probably as close to a leap of faith as I get. Maybe it's not a leap of faith, maybe it's a leap of behavior. Because I hope I act that way towards everybody. It's a challenge sometimes. I try to express commitment to ethical culture by acting towards everyone as if they have irreplaceable worth. Adler actually talked about the fact that in ethical culture we don't worship. He said we worth-ship. It's too hard to say to be a snappy saying, but that's how we do it. We do this best when we help people fulfill the potential that they see in themselves. Or maybe they don't see yet. This leads us to consider where human potential is least realized in this world, and where we can have the most effect of releasing that potential. And in part, that's a strategic decision, you see, because when you go to places where the potential can be released to the greatest, it's easier to change the world. It's like the expression, you don't give people a fish, you teach them to fish, because if they know how to fish, they can teach others to fish. So we need to empower people so that they can empower other people. We have to empower ourselves. Historically, ethical culture has done this by trying to empower children and the most marginalized, especially in urban centers where a lot of ethical culture societies existed. And that's seen in projects having to do with the workingmen's school that Adler started, or his kindergartens that he started, or job training for youth that he offered. And it came from his father and his grandfather's commitment to what was known as the Hebrew Orphan Asylum that was started in 1859 in New York City, and reflects the belief that children are our best hope at changing the world. One writer said that children are more malleable. They're better candidates for reconstruction of society's values that Adler intended through education. Adler and a friend of his, Adler Wolf, wandered through the areas of New York where children were left on their own without educational support, handing out pamphlets encouraging parents to come to the very first kindergarten that started in 1878 with only 8 children. But it was one of the first in the United States. So we focus on children here at the Ethical Society. I mean, our Camp Linden project, we pour energy and resources, especially the committee, into helping children in this city. We offer the Dictionary Project. We fight for Philly funding, for full fair funding for Philly schools. So we continue that tradition, empowering the potential of every person. I also hope we do our work by trying to build ethical relationships between each other, grounded in mutuality and respect. Now, the person who's trying to help others become empowered has to listen if it's a mutual relationship. Listen to the person in need, create respect and a sense of equality in the relationship, and cooperate in developing goals and strategies. Ethics is a two-way street. I say that over and over again. This core concept is a part of community capacity building that I spoke about a couple of times ago. Jane Addams practiced it in her settlement house movement. She was a frequent lecturer in ethical culture, and she talks about a reciprocity of relationship. She says that we have to share not only in the benefits of civilization, but in the reconstruction of the civilization. If everybody's doing that, then the distinction between the giver and the gift begins to dissolve because we're together. Adams said it this way: we have learned to say that the good must be extended to all of society before it can be held secure by any one person or any one class. In other words, charity, we have to share. But we have yet to learn to add to that statement that unless all people in all classes contribute to a good, we cannot be sure it's worth having. In other words, everybody comes together to try to figure out what is needed in society, and we work on it together. That's something that Adler's chief lieutenant, John Lovejoy Elliott, did. He actually saw the relational factor as our form of communion in ethical culture. He wrote, the churches celebrate the Holy Communion as their most sacred symbol of relationship between God and man. The ethical religion bases itself on another kind of Holy Communion, that of man with man, and endeavors to express this sense of the ultimate sacredness of the daily living and in the work of the world. So in ethical culture, social reform is about community, not charity. It's a reciprocal relationship, and it assumes a democracy in which, quote, there are no superiors and inferiors, but a basic interdependence that equalizes all. It's not noblesse oblige, right? As one young historian put it, it's not a condescending or a manipulative activity, but the demands of a democracy. When we engage cooperatively, those of radically different experiences, poor and wealthy alike, can experience moral growth. One ethical culture leader, Alfred Martin, said that ethical culture strives, quote, for the formation of right relations between personalities. He wrote that he is most entitled to be called ethically minded, who believes and acts on the belief that nothing exceeds the importance of the establishment of right personal relations, as between husband and wife, parent and children, the social classes, nation and the nation. The creating of right relationships is valued above all else, because such spiritual activity is the very highest kind which a human being can engage. The supreme good of life is to be found in the act of creating harmonious relations. So, inherent worth, relations. I also hope that our projects reflect a long-term goal of social transformation to a significantly more ethical society. I'm going to speak very briefly because this could be an entire talk, right? Ethical culture advocates for remaking the social world, and it promotes a very radically different structure where people come before profits. It demands a culture that we can be proud of, a really ethical culture. And its radically different world that I can't explore fully today is about the ends we seek. It's also about the means that we use to seek them. Historically, ethical culture has been very skeptical of extremism. It's worked within the system. It's reached out to all players. It's encouraged private ethical behavior in many forms. So, practicing ethical culture and ethical action can just be how you treat each other in daily life. That's a huge part of it. It urges democratic change and government efforts to improve society, but it rejects violent or radical means. It encourages inclusive cooperation where everybody's drawn into an ethical relationship that maximizes the goodness of humanity, broader suffrage. So, those are the ends that I think we seek. How do we do it? I hope we do it in ways that nurture this pragmatic commitment to cooperating where we agree, while allowing people to be unique and go do their own thing as well. This is a very important piece that I think we need to do better in all forms of life in our society and ethical culture. There's so much suffering in the world. For those of us like myself that's privileged enough to debate how we're going to try to alleviate that suffering, we have to keep the differences between us from getting in the way of doing anything. It happens all the time. We get distracted by our prioritizing and our planning. Our commitment to the uniqueness of individuals teaches me that individuals often have very different views about what work is important and rewarding to them. A lot of time organizations spend way too much time trying to build towards a consensus that is often unattainable. And that's okay. In recognizing and celebrating the uniquenesses of each person, we understand that our passions are fed by many different springs. That's a reality we have to work with, not work against. That's something that Ami Dar is the head of idealist.org. He told that to the AU Assembly this summer. Idealist.org, go check it out. It's one of the most popular websites. It has over 100,000 organizations trying to make the world better. It's trying to just coordinate people. And he explained this summer that too often well-meaning progressive people with nonprofits and in communities waste hours and hours trying to get priorities that everybody can agree on, right? Because we're supposed to get along, right? He criticizes these meetings where you try to come up with a list of what we should do that everybody believes on, because everybody has their favorites, and you begin with putting one thing on the list, and then you put another thing, and then, oh yeah, this and this, and by the time you get down, the longer the list, the less agreement there is, and the more argument. We don't need unanimity. There's enough suffering in the world that we can do work. We need a way to facilitate helping people working together where they agree. So those of you who work at this society tirelessly as volunteers know this happens. We run into this problem. How many times are you in a conversation where, despite our agreement on our basic values of worth and justice and relationships, we go round and round debating what stance should reflect the whole society and what has to be everybody's got to march behind? S. Bern Weston, whose name is in the room upstairs, offers this advice. He says, "It's an old saying that there are many paths to heaven. There are truth in many paths to right living, many roads leading towards the kingdom of heaven on earth. Ethical religion offers its way to such a goal." He continues, "To follow it does not require committing oneself to or against any theological view. There is one essential thing, is ethical purpose. That is the very core of ethical religion. The whole spirit of the movement is focused on the aim and the way of life, regardless of the various speculative views which its leaders and its members hold. Ethical culture flourishes best when people gather around shared values in action. Felix Adler, who founded this movement, said that it didn't matter what a person believed or disbelieved as long as he, quote, be one with us where there is nothing to divide in action. Diversity in creed, unanimity in deed. Many of you who've been here have heard this phrase a lot. It doesn't mean we all agree on the deed. It means we work together when we agree on the deed. This group works on that deed because they agree on it. Doesn't matter what their views are behind it. It's agreeing to work together. He says, this is the common ground, where we can all grasp hands as brothers united in mankind's common cause. There's the feel-good that we want. And for ethical humanists, our values offer us lots of common ground, of justice and relationship and worth. And many other values. There's no set list. There's compassion, there's integrity. No precise formula. It's hard work. Ethical culturists are skeptical of formulas and absolutes, actually. Skeptical of those who are so sure of themselves that they don't want to listen to anybody else or open themselves up to new ideas. That's a good skepticism. Many of us do share a modest, realistic idealism, the belief that the world could really be better. That's an idealism. But we also want to know how the world works. We want to be practical. So Dar recommends that rather than trying to strive for perfect consensus, we accept our diversity. And we accept that we won't all agree on each and every public statement we make. And that we instead put resources into facilitating individuals working together where they agree. So if you don't find a particular project floats your boat, suggest something else. Work where it works. Often projects are not competing, they're parallel. There are lots of ways to make the world better. And we don't know what's going to work. So we got to try lots of things. We're like a laboratory for this. Too often progressive communities, their differences become their handicaps. Susan Jacoby wrote in a book about Ingersoll, one of the greatest free thought speakers. There's a book called The Great Agnostic. She talked about the fact that Ingersoll built broad coalitions by building common ground. She says, quote, Ingersoll didn't agree with the liberal religionists any more he did with the fundamentalists. But he did believe in alliances on the issues that liberal religious people agree with him on. So that's something that she counsels that humanists and agnostics and free thinkers consider more deeply. We'll see how well we play next summer. The Reason Rally is down at the mall in 2016. biggest collection of these groups. We'll see whether we play well together. All these factors should agree on the next characteristic I see as fundamental in how we pick our actions. I try to encourage ethical action as an ethical humanist that doesn't violate reason or ignore evidence. Reason does not have all the answers to life, obviously. It doesn't have answers to beauty or love or even ethics, I would put on the table. But we should seek evidence and think logically when trying to craft group behavior, rules, or public policy. In group work, reason should guide emotion and intuition. We need more thinking, clear thinking in the world. So I take a firm stance against separation of theology and state. I'm going to explain that Thursday night at the Free Library. Education and public policy must rely on evidence, on facts we can all observe, observable, verifiable, public facts, not on personal revelation or subjective experience. I think that's probably the area where we agree the most on. The last aspect of how we choose our actions, and this is, I think, the most important. I talked about it this morning in a meeting earlier. I hope that when I encourage ethical action, I'm encouraging the projects that are sustainable because they fuel the people involved rather than drain them. All of us have to live lives where we do what matters to us and fills us up. Some people's enthusiasm, that's the fuel of changing the world. So what we do should generate more fuel. It's counterproductive if people get drained and they burn out or they give up or they retreat to self-centeredness. It happens to us all. It happens to me at times. I don't want to go that way. It's partly related to why early on in my life I rejected the glorification of suffering, that somehow if you're suffering you're doing good in the world. That was something I got from my time going to churches at times. Suffering happens. Sometimes we suffer. Trying to do good is not easy. It can challenge us physically and emotionally. It's what I want my kids to do, to challenge themselves. I don't want them to end up martyred. I want them to be fulfilled, to live a rewarding life and try to change the world. I want them to have access to an energy that fulfills them, feeds their lives and nurtures their dreams for a better world, helping them become better people. Bob, are you okay? We're going to take a break for a second. All right, so let me just finish up. Thank you. That's all right, Bob. Thank you. Glad you're back. I guess I was talking about my kids. I can pick that up. That's real enough. Feels like it's hard to get back into a script when something like this happens, when life intervenes. But I don't want my children to feel like they have to suffer to be good people. There is an energy that comes from doing good things in life. And I'll end just with this quote from Adler. I'll cut to the chase. He says, there are things that transpire in the inner life of human beings far more marvelous than the chemical processes and the flux of electric waves, did we but attend them. There is, in a particular, one kind of energy to which the quality of worth may well attach itself. It's unlike physical forces. It's not a transformal mode of mechanical energy. It's sui generis. It's underivative. It's unique. It's synonymous with the highest freedom. It's power raised to the nth degree. It's ethical energy. For me, for Adler, this kind of ethical energy, when it's shared in the world with compassion and reason, can multiply and spread. He said it this way. He put it with a simile of light. He says, The simile may be used is that of a ray of light that has the kindling effect of kindling other rays, unlike but complementary to itself. Each ethical unit, each person, each member of the infinite universe is to be regarded as a center from which such a ray emanates, touching the other centers and awakening there the light intrinsic in them. So as the light comes from you, as your ethical energy reaches out, metaphorically, we're naturalists, to other people, when you see other people excited about what they're doing to change the world, it makes you excited. If you are not excited about changing the world, you're not going to be able to change the world well. How many of you work in communities where there's a great deal of desperation and need in the world? I know one person right there. This is an interesting phrase. This is actually from Eliot. He's talking about community workers. But it could apply to any volunteer in this room that works in this society or elsewhere. He says, community workers representing charitable and philanthropic enterprises are conscientious and hard-working people. But rarely does one find that their faces and words and actions carry with them the sense of the greatness of their calling. It is indeed a difficult thing to deal with poverty and crime and sickness and not become infected with depression. But if those who seek to change society in its very structure, who are not satisfied only to improve and heal small injuries and to cure lesser troubles, but those who long in their hearts to see human beings living better lives, if they lose their faith in the best and finest possibilities of man, where shall we turn for hope? If the very vocation which seeks to improve all vocations has not close touch with the finest life, how will it be possible to affect other occupations and professions? If all men who have an equal chance, not little, but great chance, great changes will take place. This is the direction social work and social reform must tend. The true object of social reform has been stated by Dr. Adler. Social reform is the reformation of all social institutions in such a way as they become successive phases through which the individual shall advance towards the acquisition of an ethical personality. That's a challenging goal. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes your heart. It takes defending worth and justice and relationships. It takes doing things in ways where you build relationships, where you honor reason, but most of all, it has to fill your ethical energy. I'm glad you're with me here. Come help us all fill our ethical energy together. Thank you very much.